Hello and welcome back to the Application Insider channel. I've got another really wonderful student interview to share with you today. And things are coming up in this interview that have not come up in any of the other interviews I've done, but I know will be very relatable to a lot of dietetic students out there who are working on their own dietetic internship applications. Today, I'm speaking with Jeniffer Peeples, and she is going to be sharing her perspective and experience in applying to internships as a military student, as a non-traditional student, as someone who is brand new to her area, as someone who knew very much what she wanted in an internship, but was also willing to look elsewhere after having done some research, and someone who actually received her match in second round. So in the spring 2021 match, Jeniffer did apply. She submitted her applications. She did not receive a match on match day, but she has a really great story of how she landed a spot in second round with an internship that will be a great fit for her. So let's hear what Jeniffer has to share about her experience applying for internships and the tips and insights from her perspective that she can share with you. All right, I am so excited to welcome Jeniffer Peeples to the Application Insider podcast and YouTube channel. Welcome, Jeniffer.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great. I am so excited to hear what you've got to share. You've got some really unique experiences that many other students will be able to relate to. And I know that any tips, advice, suggestions that you've got will be very helpful for them. So sorry to talk of your episode, even just as we're at the top of it. Before we jump into that, why don't you just share a quick introduction about where you're from, if you'd like to share the programs you've been part of or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm originally from San Diego, California, born and raised. And then my husband decided to join the military and we got moved to Alabama, very southern Alabama, which is, I kind of started school a little bit in San Diego, but it was just like I was tinkering with the idea of going back to school. So I knew I needed a lot of math classes because I was really like that was the area that I was like the worst at. I have learning disabilities and math is not my strong suit. So I kind of just started with math and was like, okay, let's see if I can even like, how's school going to work for me? Am I going to like this? Can I do this? I'm an older student, all these things, you know? So I started off a little light in San Diego, getting some math classes out of the way. Then we moved to Alabama. And that's really where I like really started like, okay, I'm okay with school. I'm doing all right. Things are going well. I'm going to take a couple more classes, not full time, but just like get more of my math classes out of the way and more of a part-time basis. So I started at a community college in Alabama and I got just under halfway through before we had to move to Washington State. So then when we moved to Washington State, I finished my associates at Tacoma Community College and it was just associates in arts and sciences. And then I had while we moved to Washington, I knew I was going to be doing my bachelor's in Washington. So I said, okay, I need to start looking at what schools in Washington offer the bachelor's degree that I'm looking for so I can get into dietetics and follow all these guidelines that the academy has. And Seattle Pacific came up as one of my options. Obviously, some of my other options were doing like distance online learning, but I decided I didn't want to go that route when I went through school just because of my learning disabilities. And I do a lot better in person. So I knew with myself, just trying to get through this part of the process, I wanted in-person experience. And in some ways I don't regret it, but then I know that sometimes I look back and I think if I had done it the other way, would I have done well? Because I mean, it would have afforded me the opportunity to get some experiences, which we'll get into later, obviously, with the other questions that I didn't get to have just because of the situation I was in. But yeah, I finished my my bachelor's at Seattle Pacific, and I had to hold off on applying for internships because once again, we were moving. So we moved to North Carolina and I applied for this past DI March applications.
Awesome. So you mentioned that you had to finish your bachelor's faster than normal. What timeline were you on to get that done while everything else was happening in real life?
Yeah. So school, and what's crazy too is I've been like all the schools in Alabama are semester based and all the schools in Washington are quarter based. So I also had to transition from semester to quarter, which was extremely challenging
Yeah.
because like you're like usually like 14 to 16 weeks at a semester, and then quarter is 10 weeks. So like I was transitioning to like 10 weeks at a time and then taking like 14 credits at a time. At Seattle Pacific, I had to take up to 16 credits. Like most semesters I took 16 credits just to
Wow.
like get done in like the time that I needed to get done with, because I had just about a year. So I'm thinking I started in like the fall of 2019 and I graduated in spring of 2020. And usually most people will take an extra 2 quarters, sometimes 3 quarters in that particular program. So I definitely was on an expedited route.
Definitely. That's a lot of, I mean, that's a lot of credits on a semester
Yeah.
system. So doing it in a quarter system, like more power to you. I don't know if I could have done that. So, okay. When it came to, or I mean, you chose dietetics as your major. What brought you to dietetics? What led you to this career?
Yeah. So when I was living in San Diego, I had kind of like it's like such a long backstory, and I'm trying to figure out a way to like just summarize it and make it shorter. So basically, like prior to my husband, I was in a really toxic relationship for about 5 years, and I emotionally ate. I gained a lot of weight because I emotionally ate, and I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't just making the best decisions for my health and well-being. But a lot of that was around the toxic, because of the toxic relationship. And then when I left that relationship, I was like determined. I was like, I want to live my best, healthiest life. And I'm on that track. And I was like, okay, like, what can I do to start this? So like I was drinking like these big gulps of like regular soda from 7-Eleven, like daily. So that was like one of the big first changes I made was like get rid of the sodas and stop doing that, drink more water and, teas if you can, and maybe a soda here and there, but not like a big gulp every day. And then just like started slowly making more and more changes and going to the gym and just taking better care of myself, eating healthier, and just I started like losing weight obviously and being a lot happier. And obviously during that process I did kind of get a little obsessive with some things and went on some fat diets that weren't the best, but I was like, I think everyone who goes that route does tend to do those things. And then when I realized like, yeah, these aren't long-term results and they make you miserable in the interim, that I wasn't wanting to do that. So I just continued with what I knew worked for me and what went well for me, which was just, listening to myself and basically like the intuitive eating kind of, which I didn't even really know about then, but that's basically what I was doing. And then just, participating in physical activity that made me feel good and happy. And yeah, so like my assistant pastor at our church, she is like, hey, you've really done so great. It's not just about like the weight that you've lost, but like you just like you're so happy and healthy, and like have you ever thought about helping other people do this? And I was like, no. And like I had never thought about going to college. Like my parents really wanted me to go to college after high school. I took a couple semesters like right out of high school, and really I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do then. And I hated school because of my learning disabilities. And back then I didn't know how to study. I didn't know what worked best for me and my style. And so like all of that compiled with no passion, like there was no drive at all for me to go to school. So I just like went into the workforce and just was like, I just want to work and I want to earn money. But then when this question got posed to me, it was like kind of like this like little light bulb went off, and I just felt like this was it. Like there was a voice that was like, this is what you're meant to do. And I was like, okay, this is crazy, but I think I can do this. And so I started researching like, what does this look like? Like, what would I even do? I didn't even know what a dietitian was. Like,
Yeah.
like I just like started Googling and I was like, oh, dietitian, huh? And then like looking at like what they do. And I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, that sounds fun and interesting. And the other option I had, thought about was like personal training. But then I was like, well, personal training it's not long term, because eventually no matter how physically fit you are, your body's eventually going to break down a little bit, so it becomes harder and harder as you get older. So yeah, I'd prefer to stick with something that I can stay with for a little bit longer. And I'm a little bit older too. So there's that, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's kind of what got me into dietetics. And that was my backstory.
Yeah. I'm glad to see that you're in a positive place now, feeling good with everything. I'm sorry to hear it started out in such a different way. Um, but I love that someone thought of that for you, whether it was something you had even considered at all by yourself, but that you followed that suggestion, like, let me just see what this might look like. And I can just kind
Yeah,
of imagine the dive got deeper and deeper as you kind of figured out more and more and it started to
definitely.
maybe feel like it could be right for you.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So let's jump into your application experience when you're applying to internships. Um, I can only imagine how being in the military affects obviously every part of your life, but when you're doing something that is simultaneously time sensitive, potentially location sensitive, and you've got the military consideration to include in all of that. I'm so eager to hear about your experience tying all of these things together. But let's start with back when you were first, getting ready to plan or getting ready to apply to internships. How did you decide where to apply or even just the number of programs to apply to?
Yeah. So I really wanted to stick with a local dietetic internship and not do the whole distance route. I had
Mhm,
considered both options, and personally I knew that my preference lied with doing an internship that was set up for me.
mhm,
So I started, obviously the same as everyone else, kind of like figuring out what options are in your area. So I was like, okay, what options do I have? And Duke University was one of them because they're about an hour and 40 minutes from me north, which I was willing to commute because I commuted for college. So like commuting wasn't an issue. I was like, as long as it's under 2 hours, I'm good.
easy peasy.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, it's under 2 hours. Ooh, that's on the list. And I decided to apply for Duke. I know there's extremely competitive program. They take like 9 applicants, I think, out of like 52. It's pretty competitive.
Yeah.
And I really wavered with that decision, but I was like, well, you never know unless you take the shot. So it was like, even I felt like I had a remote possibility. So I was like, okay, there's a remote possibility. I have a good GPA, and that's really what they're looking for. Like, they
Mhm,
want people to have good GPAs. I mean, obviously, I had other stuff going on, no immediate like work experience. Obviously, I had prior work experience and some other experiences
mhm.
during my schooling, but not like work related. But I talked about that in my personal statement,
Nice.
and just kind of like my own journey, and the fact that like I struggled going through school, and not only did I struggle, but I had to, once I got into a higher level, I had to go at an expedited route, and
Mhm.
that I worked extremely hard for the grades that I got. And that wasn't easy by any means,
Yeah.
especially, it's never easy for anyone, but it's especially hard for people who have learning
Mhm.
disabilities. So I kind of did talk a little bit about that. It wasn't like my whole story. And it's, with 1,000 words, it's kind of hard when you have a lot to talk about to kind of narrow down what's most important. So it's like you just do your best and you look at like, what are they looking for? I talked to the DI director, got a sense of like, okay, this is what they kind of want. They want someone who's like flexible. And I really focused on the flexibility part of like how I moved around, changed schools, change from semester to quarter, and
Mhm.
how I've done this and done that, like all these things that demonstrate flexibility. I really focused on that because like that was like, to me, she said it like 3 times when I talked to her in the like interview. So I was like, okay, they're definitely looking for someone who's flexible. So this is what they really, really want. So
Mhm.
this is what I'm going to really focus on in my statement. So yeah, I did that one, and then I only applied for one other one, which was Aramark. And Aramark's internship is in Fayetteville, which is a little closer to me, so it would be like 30 minutes south from me.
Mhm.
There was like one other internship that I considered applying for that was also kind of close to Duke in Durham. I think it was through can't remember the exact name. It's like something with an M college, like Merrick or Merrick. I can't remember now, but yeah, it's like in Durham, and they're a school. And I remember I chose not to apply for them because they were a little bit more expensive, and not that finances were like a problem. I could afford the internship, thankfully, but I still would wanted to try and save some money and not have to pay a lot if I could avoid it. So I didn't choose them. And they wanted us to take, I think, 2 master's classes, but you didn't actually earn your master's. So I was like, oh, like, I don't know. I don't really like, I wasn't drawn to it. So I just was like, no, we're not going to apply for it. So I'm throwing my cards in with 2 internships and hoping for the best, you know? And I also talked to the director at Armark to, you know, again, before I applied, just to kind of get my name in and to kind of get a sense of really like what they're looking for. And I felt like I had a very strong possibility of getting into Armark and a slight possibility of Duke. So I ranked, you know, Armark first and Duke second. And it was like really like disheartening when like neither of those happened. And I remember like reaching out to Armark's director. I didn't actually reach out to Duke's, just because I got the sense that I don't know, I just didn't feel strong enough to ask why.
Hmm.
But I really did want to know why with Armark, because I truly did feel like I was going to get a slot there. Like I had a good feeling about it. Everything was telling me that I was going to get a slot. And so I reached out to the director and I was like, because she really liked me through the
Mhm.
interviews and us talking through emails. She really liked me. I could tell that they wanted me. So I was like, okay, what happened? So like I reached out to her. I was like, you know, I just want to reach out and thank you so much for considering me for Mark. I just really wanted to know like what I could have done to better to have landed a spot with you guys. And she said, honestly, it came down to, and what was so crazy about it is like it came down to something that they don't even rank high on their list. It was like work experience. So like work experience for them was like rated after volunteer experience. So I think it was like
Mm.
fifth, because it was all GPA and then volunteer and then work and then personal statement. And then like you had to do a video and a recorded video interview and send it in with your application. So that's how they ranked it. So I was like, well, everything else I have should be like high on that list, because I have a lot of volunteer experience. I have a lot of other experience that isn't direct work related, other than like my past work experience.
Mhm.
And my grades are really good. And my personal statement was like super strong. I had like, you know, someone looking at it. I had multiple suggestions, and just like it was probably one of like I loved my personal statement. I'm like maybe I'm like a little like, you know, I don't know what the word is, but yeah, like I thought it was really great. And she said, you know, they loved me so much and they did want to have me on as a spot, but I guess like there was one person who beat me out on the spot, and I don't know exactly how many spots this one had,
Uh-huh.
but she said it came down to the work experience. Like the girl and I were like matched all the
Gotcha.
way up until work experience, and she had this enough work experience that she got the slot. And I'm like, wow, okay. So that was like eye-opening of like,
Yeah.
even though they didn't rank it high, that's what it came down to.
Yeah. I mean, that's like the hundredth of a point or thousandth of a point random benefit. That's
Yeah.
so interesting. Um, that's great that you asked for feedback on your application. And that's, I mean, that's awesome that the program would share that with you. Not every program will
Yeah.
share, especially in that depth. You talked a lot about knowing or, having an idea of how they ranked different elements of the program or of the
Yeah.
application within the program. Did you find that information somewhere or did you ask for that information from the
Oh no,
directors?
so that was actually my school provides us with a list that basically has like all of the internships and like how they rank students off their application. So it's like,
Uh-huh.
well, do they rank GPA first, or do they rank work experience, or do they rank this or that? Like, so,
Mhm.
and it helps the intern understand like where to apply to and where they might stand when they're applying to internships. And obviously I didn't want to choose an internship that's like, yeah, we value work experience first, because
Right.
well, what am I going to talk about other than my past work experience, which is valid, but that's not what they want to hear. They want to
Mhm.
hear the experience I had directly related to dietetics while I was in school.
Yeah, that is really useful information to have. Was is it the Applicant Guide to Supervised Practice that they give?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's
So
it.
it's a huge resource. I know it's like 600 pages long, but
Yeah.
there is more information on there than even like on the Ascend database, because as a DI director, I had to fill that out, and it's like, how many applications did you get last year and the year before? And like you said,
Yeah.
how do you rank the different parts of the application? So for people listening or watching, I will make that resource available in the links. So, because it is very key.
It is.
I'm glad you use it. That's awesome that your program provides it for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so going into your application, oh, I've got so many questions I want to ask you because you've got so many good things that you can talk about. I guess you talked a lot about your personal statement. Did you have a certain technique or anything that you used just to accomplish the application as a whole? Did you have a certain time frame that you gave yourself, or breaking things down into certain steps? How did you just kind of like tackle the whole thing?
Yeah. Thankfully I was very fortunate that obviously I was done with school.
That's
So
always nice.
unlike my other classmates who were completing school and applying for internships at the same time, that was not me. And I didn't have anything going on. So I was able to like basically dedicate as much time as I needed to filling out that application process. I didn't do it all in a day, but I think it took me maybe like a week-ish, maybe it was less than a week. I know for a fact that Duke required the application to be due on the 1st, and then
Oh,
RMark was like everyone else on the 15th.
okay.
So my goal was, okay, get everything I need in and done for Duke, and then I can focus on whatever I need to do for RMark, which was create the video interview with the questions that they wanted answering, and then make sure that my personal statement aligns more with what they wanted to hear, because obviously each internship is different. And while your personal statement doesn't have to like be completely different, it does, like the counterparts and things you talk about and highlight change slightly. So I
Mhm.
mean, obviously like the intro didn't change, but then like more of like what I focused on talking about did change a little bit, or I would highlight other experiences that maybe I didn't highlight with Duke because I felt that's what our mark was looking for.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love that you said that, because yes, everyone asks for the personal statement. Some programs even add questions, but even if every program uses the exact same set of questions as in DICUS, they do want to see that you wrote a personal statement that's just for them.
Yeah.
So that's great. And I feel it's like there's pros and cons to having a different due date. For one, it's nice because you can like finish one and then just focus on the other. But then it's also like obviously a smaller time frame to work on the one that's due first. I didn't realize that Duke had an earlier deadline. So
Yeah.
that is key for everyone to know. Make sure you know which deadline your program uses.
Yeah, definitely. Cause I was like, oh my gosh, like I had a lot less time than I thought. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was definitely a little more expedited. But as far as like the personal statement, I know like I wish I had known about you and like what you offered at the time.
Mhm.
The person I went through, like she was great too, and she has her own coaching services as yourself with like the application and the personal statement. So she did held like a personal statement boot camp. So I did that because it had been a really long time since I like wrote my first personal statement, and like I knew kind of like the counterparts that were supposed to go into it, but obviously I wanted it to be like the best personal statement it could be. So I was like, obviously I need to get some help in this area and figure out like what and how am I going to write my personal statement.
Mhm.
And so I went through the boot camp, which was really, really helpful. And then I think it was like her second boot camp that she did. And she was asking someone to put together PowerPoint slides based off of her boot camp. And for that, she would offer, editing services. So I offered.
Nice.
And it was funny too, as I was going on vacation, I was like, well, I'm going on vacation, but I can do it when I get back if that's not a problem.
I love it.
And she was like, yeah, no problem, no rush. I was like, okay, good. I was hoping you weren't going to say no, but you never know. I was like, it was random timing for me. I had something planned, but I still want to do it. And, I could use the free editing would be great. So that was really nice to have somebody that was, and she's sat on committee as well, selection committee. So she's really understands the process. And She was a great tutor, and I don't think anything that she did made my chances less. You know what I mean? It was just, honestly, I think it was a matter of like, I always say this, like, everything happens for a reason.
Mhm.
It's always been true. And it may not seem like it in the moment, but then you like realize later, you're like, that's why that happened.
Right.
So yeah, and even though I may not never know exactly why it happened the way it happened, especially with R Mark, when I was like so close and it was such a close match to getting a slot, you know, it just, you never know. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I love that you did get, insight, help, whatever for those parts of the applications that you really wanted to focus on. Writing a personal statement is very different than any other type of writing. So it can be helpful to have someone who can give you that feedback, help you kind of get into the mindset of writing in that different style. So that's
Yeah.
great. And then awesome that you jumped on that opportunity for the little exchange of services there. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, if you could go back, not that anyone wants to go back, but if you had to go back and apply through DICUS again, is there anything you would do differently or any advice you'd give yourself?
I think I would probably look a little harder at like what other internships I could have applied to, because there were two internships that, other than the one I said I really wasn't interested in, that I could have applied for. One was through what's the other one that's not R Mark? I always forget their name and they're really big.
The big one, Sodexo.
Sodexo, yes. So there's a Sodexo internship out here in North Carolina, and I didn't know, because I could have asked, but I didn't know this, that they had options and locations closer to where I'm at, because when I looked at their internship, it was like, oh, it's further away and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, like that's not going to work for me.
Uh-huh.
And I think part of it was, again, I think some parts of their internship, some of their internships, it's like they have some set up and then you have to find others, and I
Mhm.
wasn't sure if I could do that, so I think it was just more of a fear thing than
Mhm.
anything else. But I mean, having like clinical and food service setup is like usually the hardest for most interns
Right.
to find preceptors. So maybe I feel like I should have applied for it, and I should have given myself an extra application, maybe even another application, because the one I ended up matching with on second round, it didn't even know they existed. I literally like never heard of them, like totally random. And I think if I had just gone back and done a little bit more
Mhm.
research, a little bit more digging, and then just a little more preparation into it, that's what I would do differently.
Yeah. So regarding your military situation, when you got to North Carolina, I mean, I'm assuming since you only looked at programs in that area that you knew you'd be there long enough to do an internship. Because for
Oh
some
yeah,
people,
yeah,
that's the big question. They're like,
yeah.
I'm moving, I don't know when or where.
Yeah. I mean, there's always the possibility that it's a slim possibility, especially
Mhm.
particularly with what my husband does, for them to just pull us and be like, oh yeah, never mind, you're going to go here. So I felt pretty confident that nothing was going to happen in that realm. And I figured if it did, well, then we'd cross that bridge when it got there, because sometimes you can't control these things. And
Right.
the best thing to do is just to jump in, and then if something happens, you figure it out later. And that's,
Mhm.
kind of how I've had to manage this whole thing, this whole new military life the last couple of years, and going through school at the same time as
Yeah.
moving around. And sometimes you never know what's going to happen, and you can't always be afraid of that and just go, okay, we're just going to jump in and like figure it out as we go.
Yeah, that's a great
um,
mindset to have.
yeah, so like anyone who's doing it, whether they're military or not, I think that's like the key thing to do.
Mhm. Awesome. Okay, so you just mentioned that you received your match in second round, and you have a very interesting story about how it came to be. So let's talk a little bit about what is second round even like. So second round, for those who don't know, it starts after match day. So on match day, if you don't get a match to any of the programs you applied to, you can vie for an option in second round. Tell us what that's like.
It's chaotic.
Yes.
um so obviously, like, you're super devastated that you didn't get matched to an internship, and you're like dealing with that. And then like you're questioning like, okay, well, should I apply for a second round match? What are my options for a second round match? Do I want to maybe instead get a job working, you know, in food service or at a hospital to gain some experience and have a better, stronger application next year? And I like everything about me, and this little voice is just like, no, you don't want to wait. You've waited so long for this. Like you worked really hard to get here. The worst that happens is nothing happens, and you're not going to know unless you try. So it was like, okay, again, we're just going to jump into this and figure it out. Like, somehow I was
That's
like,
really
somehow
how
I'm
you have
gonna
to do
figure this
second
out.
round. You just have to figure it out.
Yeah. So I started looking, you know, they obviously like, I'm like, okay, I'm in all like the social media, like all the Facebook pages for RD, 2Bs and everything. Like that's huge. Like social media is like the best way to get connected with people and see what's happening. I looked on Instagram. I was looking on your page and my DI coach page because she was like posting all the internships that had second round availabilities. And I was like, okay, what are like, you know, and then obviously like looking at places and then like writing down what my options were. Most of my options were distance. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, like it felt very overwhelming. Like I was like, I didn't want to do distance, but here I am. And I was like hesitant, but also like, okay, but I really want to do this and I don't want to wait till next year. Like, so this is what it's going to have to be.
Yeah.
And I just kept telling myself, I'm like, this is what it's going to be. And we're going to figure it out. You know, it's going to be okay. Like, I'm like, but at the same time, it was like, I know nobody in North Carolina. Like, that's the issue about being a military spouse or having to move around a lot is like, you lose all the connections you've made where you've lived prior. I'm like, I know a lot of people in Washington, but that doesn't help me because I'm in North Carolina. So like, and I asked all of my connections in Washington, I'm like, do you guys know anybody in North Carolina? Like that I can start asking if they will precept me? Like, and like, obviously it was like, no, nobody knew anybody. So I was like, okay, step one, go to Ascend website, Ascend lists, you know, people that are willing to accept, you know, or precept for interns. So they had a very short list for North Carolina. So I wrote down everybody, started making phone calls, and I wrote down my options for distance, but I also kind of wanted to see, I didn't know exactly like which distance internships I was going to apply for. So, but I wrote them down and I wrote down like what I liked about which ones. And I kind of was leaning towards two ones over a couple other ones. So I was like, okay, these two, I'm pretty sure I'm probably going to apply for them. But obviously I didn't really know. And then I was like making phone calls, trying to see if I could find preceptors for an internship that I hadn't even applied to or thought about applying to. So it was really weird because I was like, oh, will you precept me? I don't even know if I'm going to get into this internship and blah, blah. And it was like, started just contacting random people. And I think I had like two, I was very lucky right off the bat. Like I got somebody who was willing to connect me to somebody who could precept me for food service. So I had like already, and that was like a day, like within a day, I had like somebody who said they would precept me for food service management. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. Like, so I'm getting somewhere. And my DPD director at my college was also helping me, and she was helping me find internships and sending me like the options. And she knew I needed to stay close to North Carolina, just, you know, again, because I'm an older student, I'm married, my husband's in the military, he could go on deployment, he could get sent on training. He has a lot of like times where he works nights, sometimes he's on like 24-hour shift. And we have animals. So like to me, my animals are my babies and they have to be taken care of. And I'm like, so I got to take care of my babies. I got to be close enough to take care of the babies. So yeah, I was like, that was like kind of tricky for me, you know? And it definitely like narrowed down my options. But the internship that I ended up applying for, it was Lenore Rhine, and they're partnered with Solomaz. And they're like, when my DPD director sent it to me, like, oh, we have locations in like Charlotte and here, like they were all like far away from me. I'm like, that's really far in North Carolina. Like Charlotte's like 2 hours away from me. And I'm like, 2 hours was like the max. And I was like, even then that's still like like you never know if you're going to have like a 5 o'clock showtime or something. I'm like thinking, God, what if they had me like at 5 o'clock clinical and I'm having to leave my house at like 2 a.m. Like this would be terrible. So I was like, well, then I saw on the list that they had a location in South Carolina, but it didn't list where. And I'm close to South Carolina. So I was like, huh. So I reached out to the director and I was like, where is your like internship in South Carolina? And she's like, oh, we're in Florence. So I was like, obviously, I don't know where Florence is at. So I like MapQuest, or not MapQuest, but Google Map it. And I was like, oh, it's an hour and 40 minutes from my house. Hey,
Perfect.
that's perfect. So I was like, oh my gosh, like this is it. So then I was like, they had this particular internship again. It was all your rotations were set up. Now they did have options for ISP and distance, but I chose to apply for their in-person Florence, South Carolina internship. And then I get a call the next day as I'm helping my husband get like his car because he had some car issues. And I'm driving and I see a phone number and I'm like, I knew like I'd been applying. So like didn't want to not answer any phone number, even if I didn't know what it was, which is usually not what most people do.
Right.
A lot of like just robocalls and like telemarketing and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, like, so I answer the phone and it's them, Lenore Ryan Solomaz. And I'm like, oh my God, like, I hope they're not going to ask me to do an interview. I'm driving. Like, like, oh, I'm going to have to tell them call them back later when I'm not doing something like driving. So they're like talking to me and they're like, oh yeah, we want to interview you. I'm like, okay. And they're like, so we have a slot later this afternoon or tomorrow morning. What would work best? I'm like, well, tomorrow morning would work way better for me because I'm trying to help my husband get his car back. And he had some car issues and obviously we have 2 vehicles. So I had to help him get his vehicle back. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, no problem. So we set up the interview for the next day in the morning. And then ensues like total panic of like, oh my gosh, like what are they going to ask me? Because I was super scared of this like interview because they didn't send me any, some of the internships will send interns like questions that they're going to ask. So you kind of have an idea of what they're going to ask and others don't. So everyone's different. And they sent me nothing. So I was like, oh my God, this is like the scariest thing ever. Like, like what are they going to ask me? And preparing for that was really interesting because I was like, it's been a little while since I had M&T. So I'm like, oh my gosh, what if they ask me some M&T question I don't know? Like, and I just was like, okay, I'm going to write down like some things I think they might ask me baseline. Like, I felt like, most interviews, even with DI interviews, they ask you a lot of basic interview questions. And I've had a lot of interviews throughout my life. So I was like, regular interview questions, I can answer those all day. Like situational questions, no problem. I wasn't afraid of those. It was the M&T. I was like, oh God, like, yeah. And then like, I just sometimes like my brain will go blank. So I was like worried that I was just going to go blank. And I was like, what happens if that happens? Like all these questions. And I was like, okay, well, we're just going to go into this and it's going to be all right. And I just prepared for it the best I could. I wrote down what questions I thought they would ask me, came up with some answers that I would say based off of what they would ask me. And then a couple of things for M&T that I kind of like, you look and you see what other people have been asked. And I was like, okay, what have other people been asked? Because again, you reach out to social media and you can kind of see sometimes what other internships have asked on M&T questions. So I wrote some of those down and what I would say and maybe what I would say if I didn't know, because obviously, as we're told, don't say you don't know, like you say, right. Well, I'm not sure, but I would refer to X, Y, and Z material. Yes, so I was like, okay, now what am I going to say? I'm going to refer to my M&T. Hold on, let me go get my Krause book. Like
carry that around with you.
So the interview, the interview day, I'm just, I dress nice and I look nice and I'm like, okay, I've got this. I'm just like, I tell myself it's going to be okay. And I'm just like, just be you. Like, I just kept saying, just be you. And like so many people, like my husband and friends, they were like, you have so much to offer. Like, sometimes you don't see it. and you're like your worst critic. And I'm like, I know. It's like the one thing that I've always been told, and I'm working on it. I'm getting there, but like still sometimes like, oh God, like, do I have this? I don't know. And I just like, I went in and I was me, and like, it was such an informal interview. I was so surprised. Like, it was just like really casual, kind of like how you and I are talking. They wanted to get to know me. They wanted to know like who I was. And like,
Yeah.
that was like reassuring, because I was like, they're actually really interested in you. This isn't just like, oh, we need an intern. It was like, we really want to know you. And like, we care about who you are and what your journey is and why you're here. And I'm like, so I like just laid it out for them. And then there was like one question, and I guarantee you this is the question that got me for them to offer me the internship on the Zoom call. They asked me a really interesting question that I didn't even think that would get asked. And they're like, what do you see as challenging? And I'm like, what? Like, my brain's like, what do I see challenging? Like, this is odd. So like, I tell them the truth. I'm like, nothing. I see nothing challenging. I'm like, because I thought about it, I was like, I've been through so much. Like, I've changed schools. I've gone from quarter school to semester school. I've fought tooth and nail to get good grades with a learning disability. Like, I went to college and I graduated with honors, like things I never thought would ever happen. So like, I just, I was like, I don't think there's anything I can't do. Like, I just approach everything the same way. Like, just go in it and figure it out and do your best. And they like, really, I could tell they liked that answer. And but it was the truth. Like, it was me. And I was like, and then, they asked like, what questions do you have for us? And obviously I had prepared some questions for them, as you should with any interview. And then like, they're like, okay, do you have any other questions? And in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, well, I already got offered another internship, and it was a distance one, but I hadn't responded to them yet. And I asked feedback from the lady who had been helping me, and I told her my situation. I'm like, do I tell them I had this offer, because I really want them and I don't know if I'm supposed to tell them? Like, what am I supposed to do? And she's like, don't tell them. I'm like, okay. Because I thought, I was like, in my mind, I'm like, well, if I tell them, then maybe they'd be more inclined to offer me the internship. But I guess some internships might see that negatively. So when they asked, is there any other questions? I was like, okay, well, how can I ask them like without telling them I've already been offered an internship, or at least kind of get a sense of how they feel about me? So I was like, yeah, I really want to know when you guys are planning on making a decision.
Perfect.
And
I love it.
yeah, and they're like, well, we really like you, and you were great with the interview. We want to offer you the internship now. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, and I'm like trying not to like jump up and down on the video. I'm like, ah! Like, like just screaming in my head. I'm like, this is really happening. They just offered me the internship
Wow.
through the Zoom call. Like, it was just like totally unexpected, because I was expecting to hear, oh yeah, you should hear back from us like in a day or two. And I'm thinking, well, then if that happens, what am I going to do? Because like, most other internships, if they offer you a slot, you have usually about like 24 hours to respond. So I'm like, well, this other internship's already offered me something, even though it's not what I want. I'd rather have something than nothing. And that's where I was at. I was like, I want to do the internship. I don't care what it looks like at this point. Like, I was willing to put in the work to find the preceptors, even though I knew that was going to be a challenge, but I was willing to do it, because like, again, I've done hard things, so I could do that.
Nothing's a challenge.
Yeah.
Wow. So you let me know some of that stuff before, but a lot of that story was totally new to me. So that is awesome. I mean, congratulations on just being yourself, and that being exactly what they were looking for. And I mean, like you said, going in as prepared as you can, trying to kind of think, what are they going to ask? It's nice that you had a lot of experience to draw on for like the situational questions, but going in with some, what if they ask something else? How can I get ready for that? How do I not answer that I don't know, but I'm going to be resourceful? And then, I mean, maybe none of that even came in this super casual interview where they just wanted to chat with a little bit and see what that was like. Um, but then for that to be really, I mean, it sounds like that was the purpose of their interview, was to get to know you and not to quiz you
Yeah.
or anything like that. So that's great. And then, yeah, like you said, I've been in a situation like that for work positions that I was just like, how do you say, like, when will you let me know? Because I've got some overlapping time frames that I really need to be considerate of.
Yeah.
So kudos to figuring that out. Um, and I mean, you got your match even in second round, which, yeah, that is a chaotic mess of like a week. You do the whole
Yeah.
application thing from start to finish, like start being, let's research some programs, to finish in like 6 days
Yeah.
versus however many months or weeks you put into it before.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, it sounds like this program, even though you had never even heard of it before, is going to be a really good fit for you.
Yeah, no, I'm actually really excited about it. And I like everything else. I'm like, when something that you don't expect comes along, it's meant to be, and there's a reason for it. And I feel like it's meant to be, and it's probably going to teach me something I wouldn't have gotten from the other two internships.
Yeah.
So that's like really exciting to me. And I'm just like over the moon happy. And I
Yay.
remember even during my internship, they were asking, like, because they knew where I lived, and they're like, "Are you sure you don't want to apply for the ISP or the distance?" I'm like, "No, I want my preceptor set up." Like I told them, I was like, "I don't know anyone in North Carolina. I'm a military spouse, like, and I know that clinical and food service are the hardest, and I know for a fact here in North Carolina, the hospitals are already signed up with certain internships, so finding someone would have been near impossible. Now it could, and more than likely it would have eventually happened, and I
Yeah.
probably would have found somebody, but
Yeah.
it would have been a lot of work, which again I was willing to do. But yeah, I'm thankful that it was like, nope, it's all taken care of. I was like, I've already been through enough stress. Like moving is very stressful, like, and moving your entire, like, an entire household with
Yeah.
animals across the country. And then it's like, we with military wait like a week to 2 weeks, sometimes more, for all your household stuff to come, and then everything's in boxes, you got to unbox everything, put it where you want it. It takes forever. It's like, oh man, like just getting your house like in a normal fashion just
Yeah.
takes time. And we wanted to buy in the area because we weighed the pros of buying versus renting, and I was like, look, like we're moving to an area where buying is more affordable than renting, oddly. And I was like, why not buy? And then it's an investment that we can make money off of or break even, and if we break even, that's better than what we would have been doing, which is losing money. So we just leapt into it and bought a house. So I was like,
Awesome.
moving into a house that we just bought and being new homeowners. And yeah, it was like a lot of stuff we had to do with that too.
Yeah. I think it's so important, and this has come up throughout what you've been sharing. It's so important to know what you want and where you will fit. So for you, like, distance became an option that was better than nothing,
Yeah.
but you knew a face to face would be preferable. And for someone else, the complete opposite might be true.
Yeah.
And I think it really does come down to what are the options that are available and how do you decide what's good fit for. I mean, even the decision to go through second round, you decided I would rather try second round than wait another full year. And again,
Yeah.
someone else might be like, I think I would go
Right.
this way. Second round, stressful, scary, too much right after having done it all. I would
Oh
prefer to
yeah.
give
No,
myself time.
absolutely. I
So
think with that, like, you just have to approach it. You really have to weigh the pros and cons, and you have to ask yourself, what is that going to look like with whichever decision you make? Like if you chose to go the other route, because I did that. I looked at, okay, if I chose to put it off till next year, like what does that look like for me? It looks like, well, I'm going to have to go get a job because, not that I need the money, but I need the experience to make myself look better for
mhm,
internships next year. But then I went back to, even if I do that, my chances are still not high. Like, because this is a competitive, and these are competitive internships, and it doesn't get that experience is not going to guarantee me a slot next year. So that's
mhm.
where I was at. I was like, it's not going to guarantee me a slot, and I really don't want to wait. And that's where I was. And I was like, so I'm just jumping in
Yeah.
and hoping for the best. And like, again, if it didn't work out, then that's where you have to reassess and be like, okay, now what?
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
it's always a reassessing process.
Well, jumping in seems to be a really great method for you to be using, whatever it is. So I'm so glad that it works for you and that you've had such success with it.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
okay, so tell us, I mean, I know you just got the match recently, but tell us about your internship. When do you even start? Do you know what your first rotation will be or anything like that?
Yeah, so we are going to get some orientation stuff the beginning of September, and we'll be starting our rotations like mid-September. So I'm kind of excited that like I get a little time in between now and then to just like decompress again and just focus on things I love to do. Like I've just like, and getting to know the area that I live in, which I was hoping to do instead of like being thrown to somewhere that's like I'm not unfamiliar with, and I'm trying to make friends and all this stuff. So I was like, well, at least now I have a little bit of time. And I also have some time to do some M&T review before the internship, which is nice. And
Mhm.
so, yeah. And then what's crazy is then like there's this other dietitian who's like she's also a military spouse, and she's planning to move out here and start her own practice. So I connected with her, and she was looking to hire some people, but I explained to her like, hey, like I really want to work with you, but my internship starts in September. And as you know, like it's a very intense time. And on top of that, this internship is like one of the other internships that I didn't want to do. They require 2 master's classes and not
Oh.
offer the actual master's degree. But I was like, hey, I've never been opposed to learning. There's always a benefit to it. It just, again, at that time, the reason I didn't
Mhm.
choose that route was because I was like, well, it's going to be more expensive. And I'm not actually earning a master's. And this program, they offer the master's. It's just not in conjunction with the internship. But they did say that if I chose to, which is kind of a nice added bonus, that I would get 15% off if I chose to actually do the master's through them. So
That's
it's something
cool.
to consider.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and that's some awesome networking you've done for being new to the area. And you've got that awesome connection with someone that, even if it's just someone you can chat with or shadow or something like that, that'll be a really great connection to take advantage of.
Yeah, well, actually, I am not really shadowing her, but I'm
Are
working with
doing
her
some
as a
work.
contract basis right now. So I'm doing some paid contract work with her, which is really exciting because, like, I was like, never thought that would happen either. And then it's like I'm doing so good. I'm like, wow, like I really like this, and this is going so well. So
That's
that's been nice.
good. Confirmation that you're headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well, with every episode of the podcast, I like to give my listeners some type of action item that they can do today or whenever they're listening for their application, their education, or their career. So, do you have some type of action item that you would suggest people do?
I would say research is like the hugest action item you can take. Research as much as you can, research what does the program have to offer? What does it cost? How long is it going to take? Research, what you're going to be doing. Like, are you going to be just
Mm.
going to school? Are you going to go to school and work? I mean, obviously, everyone's situation is so different. And in my situation, again, like I was commuting 2 hours like to school every day, and that was one way. So 4 hours a day of commuting didn't leave me a lot of time to work a job. And I think that's part of why I wasn't really able to work, because I was like, well, I have enough time for school and I have enough time for schoolwork and
Mhm.
maybe some extracurricular activities. And that's what I did. But I love the extracurricular activities I participated in. I was part of the dietetic association. So I was a student rep for the Seattle Dietetic Association. And I worked with my school on our community kitchen. Was like super, super fun. So I had that experience to talk about. And then some other volunteer experience I had in between all that stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, just like researching and maybe just like writing down everything too. It gives you an idea and a path that you can take, because like if you're like directionless, it doesn't really help, and it's like more confusing than anything. But at least if you have the information and you can look back on it, or you can look forward to it depending on whatever it is that you're wherever you're at in that process, and whether it be school or the internship or after internship or anywhere
Reciprocate every
between.
step. Definitely. Okay, I love that. Jennifer, are you on social media, or is there a way people can connect with you online?
Yes. So I have a Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. Although my TikTok is kind of like every now and then thing. So more, and it's not really dietetic stuff related either. It's really random. Like I, side note, I am a fan of mushrooms, and I started learning how to grow mushrooms. So I did some
Oh,
TikTok
wow.
videos on growing mushrooms. So yeah, that's like my TikTok was like some of them were about mushrooms. So I'm like, people are probably like, she's so strange.
There might be a niche audience out there that is interested.
Yeah. But yeah, so Facebook, and I have one N and two F's is how my name is spelled. So it's Jeniffer, and then Peeples, and Peeples.
Awesome. Is that also your Instagram handle?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And I'll put links to all of that in the show notes so people can find it and connect with you if they'd like. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective and your experience today. I so appreciate it. And I know that those who are listening are, or they will as well.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Oh, you mentioned that you wished you had found Application Insider sooner. So when did you actually come across my account or any of my stuff?
Yeah, so what's crazy is you actually, I'm pretty sure that you did stuff with Seattle Pacific, correct?
Um, oh yeah. Is that
Yeah.
SPU? I did a webinar with you guys.
Yes, yes. Okay, so that's how I found out about you, because my friend Maria, I'm gonna butcher her last name, so I'm not gonna say it, but she's one of my student, like we went to school together, and she was just behind me, but we had some classes together, and she's a good friend of mine. She invited me to do the webinar, and I really wanted to go. There was something else that came up that day that I couldn't do it, and I was really bummed about it. But then I started following you on social media, and then I saw your whole post about this interview stuff, and I was like, I really would love to share my own experience, because I know it's like super unique, but I also really love to talk about it to other people, because I never know who, like, how my story might impact somebody or help somebody. Because like, I think if I know there's other people that are like myself or close to myself that are going through this similar situation.
Yeah.
I mean, I had another military spouse who is graduating this year from a college out in Hawaii, and she went through the whole issue, same, very similar issues as myself, so I think sometimes if we had like a little bit of a support system, and I know we're kind of like the unicorns, we're not like the majority, but like it's nice to like have that support system of like, hey, someone's been there and done that, and this is how they did it, and it wasn't easy by any means, but
No.
like sometimes not everything easy is worth it. So
Yeah. Awesome. A giant thank you to Jennifer for sharing her application experience and the very exciting addition that turned out to be second round. I'm so glad that second round ended in a successful match for her. Sounds like she found a program that will be a really great fit. I think it's really important to note that throughout the episode, Jennifer referred to many times where she knew exactly what she wanted and what elements were really important for her in a program, both in her undergrad program and as she was looking at internship programs. I think this is a huge step for everyone to make sure they include in their own application planning, preparing, applying process. It's so important to know what you want and what you need and what will make a program a good fit for you. Because when a crossroads potentially comes up, it helps you make the decision of what to do. So for Jennifer, when she didn't receive a match in the official match, that helped her decide, do I want to go into second round, or am I willing to wait another year to apply again? She wanted to take the risk with second round. And then when a distance option came up in second round, which was not her preference, she again decided I would take a distance option over waiting again to apply. Luckily for her, a face-to-face option, which was her priority preference, did come up in second round, and it really sounds like it'll be a great fit for her. So I'm excited that that came up, even from a program she had never heard of before. I hope that hearing from Jennifer's perspective with a lot of elements that I know are situations for many other dietetic students, whether it's military, non-traditional student status, having not having received a match and considering second round or just wanting to know what that is like, I hope you could gain from what Jeniffer had to share. Anything we talked about in this episode that has a link associated with it in any way is in the caption below. So go ahead and follow up with those if you are looking for those resources or want to include them in your own application planning and preparing. Also, the contact information for Jeniffer is included below if you want to connect with her in any way online. And I hope that with all of the guidance and insight and perspective that Jeniffer had to share, you got some insider insight that will help your application stand out.